So we're in a series now. This is week 2. It's about your point of view. Because your point of view on a given situation or event or on people really impacts how you respond to it and sometimes can change you in the midst of it. As a pastor, I get called into some wonderful moments of life with people. Like the birth of a baby, and it's always interesting. For some people, the birth of a baby is a great celebration, and for others, it's like, how are we going to afford to pay for this, right? It's all your point of view that affects how you respond emotionally to a significant event. Or I've been at weddings where I can see the couple up front. They are so excited to start this journey. I look past them, and I see people like they have no idea what they're getting into, right? And then even in some of the worst moments of life, I've had privilege to be part of situations. I've seen people where anger and bitterness just cloud the whole funeral. And then there are others that even have joy and celebration. Their sorrow is mixed with a deep love. Your point of view impacts how you experience an event, and that in turn impacts other people. We're looking at individuals in that last 24 hours that led up to the cross. They encountered Jesus, and the way that they encountered Jesus has something to say to us. Because some of them loved him, some of them hated him, and some of them were perplexed by him. And the way they encountered Jesus has lessons for us today. We're going to look at one of my favorite people in the New Testament. That's everything that was written from Jesus on. His name is Peter. And I think that Peter's going to teach us that when we face our failures, Christ will give us forgiveness and renewed purpose. When we face our failures, when we lean into them, not avoid them, run away from them, or ignore them, we can actually find Jesus will give us forgiveness and a renewed purpose. So, Lord, I just pray that you would speak through me today. Because, God, every single person in this room has failed to some extent. We have failed you. We have failed others. And I know how powerful it can be that when you walk into those failures with us, who we can be when we come out the other side. So use me this morning in a way that helps people, not hurts them. The way that just like raises you up as someone that we would draw near to and not run away from. Speak, I pray, and help us to hear. I trust you and I love you. Amen. Peter is a remarkable person in the story of Jesus. He's actually a significant individual in the whole story. He's one of the first people that Jesus calls out of the business world into ministry. He trains Peter. And Peter's one of these guys that I just love because he thinks first. No, he acts first and thinks later. Speaks first and thinks second. I don't know anyone like that in my life, right? But Peter is this guy. This is the guy that is willing to jump out of a boat to walk on water to be near Jesus. This is the guy that Jesus brought into unique situations, some private experiences of miracles. He saw Jesus in a way that no one else saw except for 2 other disciples. We call it the Transfiguration, where Jesus revealed himself to a special way to Peter. And I think there was a reason why. When Jesus asked the disciples, hey, who do people say that I am? It was Peter who said, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He was the first of the disciples, the people that were called to follow Jesus, who recognized who Jesus was. He's a great individual. And we're going to look now at a moment of that last meal before the cross. It was what's been known as the Passover meal. We've translated it into the last meal, the Last Supper. And Jesus looks at all of his disciples. Now, they've had a great time together, a little perplexing because Jesus has been redefining this experience for them. And he tells them, this very night, you will all fall away on account of me. Well, talk about killing the buzz at the party, right? It's just like, guys, I just know that you are all going to abandon me. Pass the bread, right? For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Jesus understood from the beginning that when he approached the cross, it was going to be his burden to carry because he was the only one qualified to really carry not the physical cross, because lots of people carried their crosses and were crucified, but the work on the cross was his and his alone to carry. But after I've risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. What I love about this is Jesus is facing the cross, and his primary thought at this meal in front of all these people is, I want you to know what happened so that you won't all fall into despair. He's given them hope. They just don't see it at this point. He's like, I get that you're all going to abandon me, but I want you to understand that I am going to rise again, and when I do, I'm going to come looking for you. You won't be alone in this. What love, right? Peter replies, because this is Peter, again, speak first, think second. Peter goes, if all of them fall away on account of you, I never will. Thanks, Peter, right? He's just going to speak out boldly in front of everybody. And this is an inspirational moment, right? We've had these moments. Maybe it was in a church service. Maybe it was on a weekend retreat, a missions trip, or one of those moments where you're in the safety of the fellowship of all people who are religious like you, in a safe environment. What do you say? I'm in it to win it with you, Jesus. And I love Jesus because he knows Peter, right? Like, you know your kids when they speak out like this, right? And Jesus says, truly I tell you, and this is important, that's a code phrase in Matthew. In Matthew's gospel, because you can't make things bold or underline or put asterisks, there's code words, and what code phrase for Matthew is, I want you to remember what I'm about to say. This is Jesus' way of saying, don't forget this. It's critically important. This very night, Peter, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. What he's saying is Peter, thank you for saying that, but I want you to know that I know when the pressure's on, before dawn, before 24 hours passes, you're going to let me down in a spectacular fashion. And Peter declares, because what is Peter knows better than Jesus, right? Peter declares, no way! Even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. Jesus probably thinking, be careful what you say. Even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. And one of the reasons why I think Peter is important in the story of Jesus is look at how everyone responds. All the disciples say the same. Peter is an inspiration to the disciples. He's a leader among leaders. He stands up among his peers, and when he speaks, people listen, and they respond. This is why he's an important person in this story. He's inspirational, but Peter lacks self-awareness. Jesus has awareness of his self. And so let's zoom forward a little bit because we're going to go through now. The meal's over. Jesus has gone off to a place to pray. He has now been arrested and he is standing trial. And it's true. Out of the 12 followers, we call them disciples. I mean, Judas is on his own doing his own thing. 9 of them run when Jesus gets arrested because they're frightened. Peter and John follow Jesus. John, for some reason, has the influence to get actually into the trial. He's in Caiaphas' palace. We talked about this last week. Up close, and Peter can't get in the building, so he's outside the palace in the courtyard, kind of like trying to hear what's going on through the open windows, be as close as he can. So Peter is sitting in the courtyard, and a servant girl comes and says, "You were also with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it. Wait a minute. I'll follow you to the end, ride or die. But he denied it before them all. And what a contrast. In the safety of a religious gathering, of everyone who feels and believes like him, he's able to say in front of all of them, ride or die. But when you're in a dangerous situation or you're confronted by people who don't believe like you and are challenging you, no way. I don't think anyone in this room has ever been in that circumstance, right? He goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, that's one. Then he went out to the gateway. So he tried to get away from the courtyard. He's backing out of the situation, doesn't want to be amongst all these people. And there's a servant girl who saw him and said to the people there, hey, this guy was with Jesus of Nazareth. All of a sudden, people pick up their heads. And he denied it again with an oath. Now, we think of it with an oath like, no way, cross my heart and hope to die when we were kids. Not like that. In this day, to give an oath is to swear by God. And when you're in a deeply religious culture, that means something significant. This is more like being on trial as a witness, hand on the Bible, lying. We call that illegal. Right? Peter goes to the point where he calls down an oath. I don't know this guy. Wait a minute. You said this guy was the Son of the living God. That was the second time. Now, after a little while, those standing near went up to Peter. Now Peter's got a bunch of people right in his face. He has seen the swords. He has seen the soldiers. He knows that Jesus is in the trial. I bet you he's picked up. It is not going well. Now he's scared. And what happens? Surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away. In other words, you're from a different region. You're from Pawtucket, same place where Jesus came from. Wouldn't that be incredible, right? Your accent gives you away, right? And then he began to call down curses. Now, this isn't like Jesus dropping F-bombs or using colorful language. Calling down a curse. Hear this. In Jewish culture, meant, may God curse me if I am lying. That's significant, right? That's now elevated things. I don't know this man. This is someone for whom fear is driving him to a place he never thought he would go. And I get the situation. My life is on the line. My freedom's on the line. And so when the situation ramps up, Peter collapses. Ever been in that situation? Man, you're willing to stand up, raise your fists, shout out allegiance. You're all in for Jesus. Let's go. But then when you're surrounded by people who are pressuring you, when something is on the line that's important to you, when you're afraid, you crumble. And immediately a rooster crowed. And then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. This is Bible language for he sobbed. This is a moment when you finally see yourself the way God sees you. In all of your weaknesses, when you understand how Jesus knew exactly what you were going to do and you are ashamed of what you've done. You have failed so badly. You didn't even think you could do this. You have no idea how you got to that place and your life collapses. How in the world could I have done this to God? How in the world could I have done this to them? Now, this is important. Why do we do this? Because it's not like fear is sin. Just because you get afraid doesn't mean that's bad. Just because anxiety rides up, that's not a sin. And I really believe that. We feel afraid. We feel anxious. Emotions happen to us. It's what we do with those emotions that are critical, right? Because we can allow our fears to concede our character. Isn't that Peter? This is Peter who's willing to lie in front of a crowd of people. The guy who stood up to inspire now crumbles his character and compromises it because he's allowed fear and anxiety to drive him to a place where he will concede his character. You know, like you're willing to sleep with him because you don't want to lose him. Or fear can cause us to rescind our convictions. We pull back on our beliefs. It's when you're in the locker room and you're surrounded by a bunch of people and they're like, you're not one of those people. You go to church? Why do you do that? That's stupid. What are you, one of those Bible thumpers? And what do? No, that's not me. You were okay on the retreat. You were great in faith group. You were really cool in church. But now you're surrounded by people who don't believe like you. And what are you? You're afraid that they might know who you really are. You're anxious you could lose friendships over this. And so you pull back your convictions or you compromise your conduct. You're so afraid that you're going to lose the sale, not have enough money, not be able to pay for the college bill, worried about how the bills come. You're willing to lie about the project, right? You don't want to accept responsibility that you blew the service. You overrepresented what they were capable of doing. And so, you'd rather lie than face the truth. That's when what we call the sin happens. Not because you're afraid, not because you're anxious, but because of what you let it do in your life. the impact it had on your character, your convictions, and your conduct. And there's a lot to be afraid of in life, right? Loneliness, who wants to be alone? If I'm going to lose my friends, then I will lie to keep my friends. I'll pull back on my convictions. Or finances, right? Money's a big deal. How many times do we hide the truth from our family or from our spouse? Or we get ourselves into huge debt just to try to keep up a lifestyle we can't afford? You know, or illness strikes and we get afraid, and what do? We lash out at people. We get angry at God. All of a sudden, the wonderful relationship with God crumbles under suffering and trial and struggles. We face the death of someone we love, and then we shake our fist at God and we walk away from him. We face our own deaths. And suddenly the faith that gave us inspiration now doesn't exist, and we're angry at God, and we're fearful, so afraid of dying. That the example that we set when everything was great is not the image we're conveying when everything has gone bad. We turn on the TV, and anxieties and fears rise up to us, and then we create a lifestyle of fear, not strength or courage, because of the power of that influence and what we're letting that influence have on our lives. And this is Peter. Peter didn't know how he was going to respond in a situation when he was confronted like that. He thought he did until he got into the moment, and then he was willing to compromise his character, pull back his convictions, change his conduct because he felt threatened by the situation. I've come to look at this verse a little differently. This is a different gospel author lets us know that when that rooster crowed, it wasn't just heard by Peter. Peter went outside and wept bitterly, but Jesus must have been near a window because he turned and he looked straight at Peter. You know what I think is happening? I think Jesus is saying, I see you, Peter. I see you. Not in a bad way, not in a condemning way, not in a like, oh, I can't believe you disappointed me way, because he already knew what Peter was going to do. I think this is like, Peter, I've seen you your whole life. That's why I called you into ministry. I saw the strength of leadership you had. I saw the potential that was inside you. Peter, I saw you, looked you right in the face when you said I was a son of the living God. And you know I looked you right in the face when I said, get behind me, Satan. Peter, I looked at you when you walked on water. And Peter, I looked at you when you fell below the waves because you were afraid. Peter, I looked at you at supper. I told you this would happen. And I gave you hope. Peter, I have seen you your whole life in a way that even you haven't seen. You've looked in the mirror, but you haven't seen what I see. You see the strong, take the hill, right? Grab the goal. We're going to do this, but you don't see yourself the way I see you. The strengths, the weaknesses, the successes, and the failures. What you're going to do in a certain circumstance and what you think you're going to do. I see you, Peter. It's like he sees you. You see a mirror, and what you see is an outward reflection of who you are, but Jesus looks deeper inside your soul. He has seen you from beginning to end. He has seen you from the moment of your creation in your mother's womb, and he has seen you and watched you all the way to your death. He has seen you when you've done spectacularly wonderful things that you're so proud of and people praise you for, and he has seen you when you have failed spectacularly. He has seen the things you've done in secret, and he has seen the things you've done in public. He has seen what you've done in a room full of people who all share the same convictions, and he's seen what you've done when you've been surrounded by people who don't. This is the thing. Jesus has always seen you. He's always known you. And Luke tells us this, one of the other authors. Luke says that, actually, Jesus says this to Peter. This is another name for Peter, Simon. Simon, Simon, Satan is asked to sift all of you as wheat. Isn't it interesting that Jesus is saying, you know what? Satan wants to take the whole group down, Peter. But I'm looking at you because I know the influence you have. I know, Peter, what you can do if you walk through this failure with me. He says, because I've prayed for you, Peter. What about all the others? I think he's talking about Peter because Peter is one of these people on the team that has such influence that all the team responds around them. Right? He's the TB12 of the Patriots, that when we're down and we only got 2 points and we need 10 in order to win the game, what do we think? Of course we'll do it. Tom has the ball, right? He's got that type of linchpin influence on everybody. And I think he sees that and he goes, Simon, I've prayed for you. Because I think the way as Simon goes, everyone follows him. We're going to see that in a minute. And then he says, Simon, I've prayed for you that your faith may not fail. I'm behind you. I'm with you. I'm on your side. And when you have turned back, that's meant to give Peter confidence. Strengthen your brothers. You know what he's saying? You're going to fail me. I know it. That's why I prayed for you. But it's okay. When you get out the other side, don't forget the others. He's giving Peter a new purpose. Peter, this isn't just about you. This is about everyone who gets inspiration from you. So now, this is after the resurrection. The tomb is empty. The disciples are kind of confused. They don't really know what's going on. Jesus is showing up and they're like, okay, but he's gone. He's disappeared. He's not with them at the moment, right? And Peter is wrestling with his failure. So Simon Peter, Thomas, known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana and Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, 2 other disciples were all together. So here they are. There is the crowd. Here's Peter's influence shows up. I'm going to go fish, Simon, Peter says. Because what do you do when you fail? What do you do when you have that moment when you really see yourself the way that God sees you? You know that moment when you're not proud of who you are and what you did, and you don't like what you've discovered about yourself? You didn't think that about yourself? I didn't think I'd crumble. I never thought I would deny my faith. I didn't think I would go and do that thing that I'm embarrassed about. I've disappointed people. I've disappointed God. What do? Go back to life before Jesus, right? Because that's what Peter does. Peter goes back to fishing. He goes, I'm going to go fish. And they say, here's Peter's influence, well, we'll go with you. And so they go out and they got in a boat, but that night they caught nothing. So here's what happens. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't realize it was Jesus. Jesus goes to them. He doesn't wait for them to come find him. He goes to them. And he shows up on the shore. They've been fishing all night, and he says to them, hey, guys, why don't you throw your net out the other side? And they're like, whatever. And they pull in a huge catch of fish. And they go, bing, 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 bing. Right? Someone goes, that's Jesus. Peter jumps out of the boat, swims ashore while the others are kind of going at it with the boat to get back there. There's already a fire. They run up to Jesus. They're so excited. Jesus makes some breakfast, some bread and some fish sitting around the fire. You know what this whole scene reminds me of? Jesus is putting Peter through a familiar situation. First, when he called Peter into ministry, Peter had been fishing all night and didn't get anything. And Jesus says, hey, throw the net out and pull it in. And he feels okay. And there's a huge catch of fish. It was his call to ministry. And Peter had been the one to jump out of the boat to walk towards Jesus. Now he's the one to jump out of the boat to swim towards Jesus. That was his lesson of faith. And then what did he serve him? He served the crowd fish and loaves. That miracle that he had taught them that was going to equip them for ministry. He brought them back to a familiar place in order to meet them so that he could touch Peter in his failure. Because that's what's going to happen. Whenever we fail Jesus, he comes to us. It's remarkable. This is what the lesson of Peter is, that God has always seen you. And when you fail, he will show up. He doesn't abandon you. He doesn't reject you. He comes to you because he understands your nature. And he wants you to know that you're loved. He wants you to understand, I'm with you in this. And he'll speak to you in ways that are familiar. It might be a song that we sing, and maybe you'll want to come up on your streaming service. It could be a passage in the Bible. It could be a statement at a faith group. You could be going through a really low time, and you're listening to a podcast, whatever it is, a sermon or something, and then God will get your attention. And what Jesus does after he's made the situation safe for Peter, he says, let's go for a walk. And when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you remember when you stood up in front of everybody and you said, no way, not me? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Then feed my lambs. They kept walking. Uh-oh. A second time. Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, well, then take care of my sheep. A third time. 3 times you denied me. So this is the thing when we fail. We can't escape the consequences of our actions. It doesn't mean that they're erased. But Jesus is saying to us, I will walk with you through the pain of restoration, through the relationships that you broke, through the failure that you've committed, through this revelation of yourself that you don't know what to do with. If you lean with me into the pain of your failure, I'll take you to a place of renewed purpose. But we can't escape it. The only way to grow is to grow through it. So the third time he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time. He wasn't angry at Jesus. I don't think so. I think the pain is, I see myself differently now. You know what we call that? Self-awareness. I now see myself differently. And I love this phrase, Lord, you know all things. Peter has grown through this experience. And I think Peter is saying, like, Jesus, of course you know all things because you knew I was going to fail you. And yet you brought me into the garden to pray. You knew I was going to fail you. And yet you met me on the shore with breakfast. You knew that I failed you, and you took me for a walk. You know me better than I know myself. This revelation, this self-awareness of who I really am has now come to me. You know that I love you, and Jesus goes, feed my sheep. Now something's going to happen. Because I think Jesus now saying, Peter, you're finally mature. You've changed. Because self-awareness breeds humility, creates maturity. And that's what Jesus wants, self-aware, humble followers who see themselves differently as they truly are and understand his love as it truly is. And again, very truly I tell you, sometimes the truths that Jesus has for you are painful truths. Very truly I tell you, you're going to abandon me. You need to know that about yourself if you're going to become the man or the woman that I created you to be. You need to see yourself. Right? Because we're the worst leaders are the people who lack self-awareness, right? He's like, you need to know that you're not as strong as you think you are. And now he says, very truly, I'm telling you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself, you went where you wanted. But when you're old, and this is what he means, you're going to stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter will glorify God. He's like, you know what, Peter, you are right. You will die for me. Because this is what happened to Peter in his elderly later years, as a leader of the first church, as a follower of Christ who has matured through self-awareness and humility. He was crucified. Except Peter did something extraordinary. He asked the officials if he could be crucified upside down because he didn't see himself worthy anymore to be crucified in the same manner as his Savior. Peter grew up. And the way to become mature was to go through his own failures. To do that, he had to become self-aware. And that made him a humble leader. Even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. And Jesus is saying, you're absolutely right. Now you're ready because you see yourself differently through the lens of failure. It's okay. Peter would go on to become a great leader. We have 2 of his letters we've preserved since the first church that's so important to us. He was the doorway through which God opened the church for people of all nations. He continued to have a significant influence, and he continued to struggle with his character at times. Paul had to confront him on that. Doesn't matter. Self-aware, humble, changed. When we face our failures, Christ will give us forgiveness and renewed purpose. That's a promise for you in this room. I don't know what you do in the darkness of your own house. I don't know what you do when you're alone. I don't know what you did at school or at work, in the community. I don't know how you compromised yourself, how you pull back on your convictions. I don't know the things you've done that you're ashamed of. But I wanted you to know today that when you face that with Jesus, you can find forgiveness and a new purpose. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's good. The question becomes how? How do we find our way back to Jesus? Peter gives us some, his story gives us ideas. Respond when Jesus shows up. Jesus will show up for you in your failures. It may come through a hard conversation with somebody who loves you, who wants to say, I see you, and I see what you do when you're not around your Christian friends. It may come through the Bible. Sometimes, isn't it crazy that when we fail, what do we run from? The things that help us get back. Like we stop reading the Bible, we stop going to church, we stop going to faith group, we pull back from our Christian friends. But Jesus shows up in these places, and he is calling you back to him. The path back to him may be through self-awareness and understanding what you did, taking ownership of what you did, but the path back to him, hard as it may be to the place of renewed purpose. You got to face your fears and failures with Christ. It may be in therapy, it may be in confession, it may be with friends, it may be with faith group, it may be with those who walk through life with you. But the reality is, to see yourself in the mirror means not just to see who you are on the outside, but it's been a metaphor for thousands of years of who are you on the inside. The strength of character to own what you did with your family, with your friends, with other people who followers of Christ, but to say, this is who I am. These are my fears. These are my anxieties. And I know that when I'm in this type of situation, I may crumble. So I don't want to go out to drink with you guys. I don't want to watch that type of show or movie. I know that if I'm going into that sales, I need you guys to pray for me because I may crumble. I know that if I'm playing this sport, when I'm in the locker room, I may yield, so stand by me. I just know this temptation happens to me. Embrace humility and self-awareness. The people I love to be around are the people who have a great, healthy self-awareness. They see themselves as they are. And in the conversations I have with them, they are honest, genuine conversations of authentic people who say, this is who I am. You're right, I speak before thinking. You're right, I can say things and offend people. You're right, I can drink too much. You're right, I understand that when I'm pressured by people, I can collapse. That's why I keep walking with Jesus. I don't serve Christ because I'm strong and gifted and because of what I bring to the table. I serve Christ because he called me to. Isn't that a miracle? When willing to move forward with renewed purpose, not hide out, pull away, withdraw, but to get up and now to go into those situations, maybe where you've compromised. Because Peter had to go face all of his friends. Guys, I crumbled like a house of cards when the pressure hit me. This story of Peter's collapse is in all 4 stories in the life of Jesus. It was important to the church. It was Peter like, hey, thank you, John. The last of the Gospels, but you didn't forget that. Because I think it became a lesson to the whole church and to every follower. You're not called because of the strengths you bring to this. You're called because Jesus loves you. And he sees you for who you are. And yes, you're going to fail. But if you face that failure and move forward with Christ, you'll come out a new person with renewed purpose. If you run from it, you'll diminish. So through this series, we've been wanting to give you an opportunity to just spend some time with Christ. So we're going to give you just a moment of silence. You may want to take a picture of this and bring it home. What are the fears and anxieties you carry that you can turn over to Christ? They're not sin, but they're influence. One of the ways is to understand this about yourself and to deal with it. Or what are the failures you carry that he could forgive? Because our fears, our anxieties, our failures, it's like an enemy force coming after us. But Jesus will appear to hold them back if you walk it with him. Take a moment with Jesus.